Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Caraba. I am a director here at the club and also have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Public Affairs Committee. So on behalf of the Union League Club, I am very pleased to welcome you today to today's luncheon, and thank you especially for coming out on such a challenging weather day. We have collaborated often with the Illinois Academy of Criminology and have had a strong partnership with the IAC's pursuit of our shared mission to sustain and improve our criminal justice system. I want to thank Ed Mogul and the Illinois Academy of Criminology for their steadfast friendship and for bringing today's program here to the club. This luncheon is very much in keeping with our own tradition of civic affairs, leadership, and has special significance to the Union League Club and its members. Several years ago, today's featured honoree, the Honorable George Leighton, received our club's Distinguished Public Service Award. We offered him this recognition because, like the IAC, we were deeply impressed by Judge Leighton's legacy of leadership and grateful for his tireless efforts to advance justice in our society. And today, we are very much delighted to join forces with the Academy as they bestow upon Judge Leighton the prestigious Norval Morris Justice Award. So again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Union League Club of Chicago, and congratulations to all of the honorees. Thank you very much.
If you look at the second to the last page, this is the relief at the top of the Code of Hammurabi, written in 1750 BC. It's in cuneiform in the language, the Akkadian language. But notice, this is the code, you know, that goes into lex talionis, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But what's significant about this image is that Hammurabi, the most powerful man in the world at that time, had to receive the laws from Shamash. The law sometimes is not enough. And E.A. Spicer, who's a famous Assyriologist, said of this image that it's an indication of the beginning of the idea of rights, that there's something beyond the power of the emperor, something beyond the law that we have to be aware of. And I think that's a very sensitive reading of what we want to focus on here today, and that is that the law sometimes is not enough. Sometimes we need heroic people to focus our attention on justice. All right, now we're very honored to have a partner in Jenner and Block, Jeff Colman, who is a friend of Judge Leighton, who has kindly prepared a PowerPoint, which I hope if there's a pillar between you and the screen, please rearrange your seat so you can see this PowerPoint. I call Jeff Colman forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's a great privilege for me to be here today as your Academy presents the Norval Morris Justice Award to George Leighton, a dear friend and an inspiration to so many of us. I've known Judge Leighton for 37 years. I've known him as a judge, as a friend to me and my family, as a mentor and an inspiration to so many. Judge Leighton is an inspiration as a person, lawyer, judge, civil rights advocate, advocate for justice in our criminal law system, death penalty opponent, and as a family man. And his daughter Barbara and her husband Robert are here with us today, and we've become dear friends over the years as well. It's totally appropriate for your Academy to present the Justice Award to George Leighton, named after Norval Morris. When I was in law school, as Judge Evans noted, Professor Morris's book, The Honest Politician's Guide to Crime Control, was required reading. Later, I had the privilege of working with Norval on several criminal justice reform issues. Norval Morris's commitment to improving our system of justice was unparalleled. I've been asked to say a few words about George Leighton and his efforts to promote justice and correct injustice in our criminal justice system. I could spend hours talking about this subject. Indeed, young lawyers at our law firm have videotaped George Leighton for over 20 hours talking about the matters that I'm going to summarize briefly today. So first, I'd like to tell you a few things about George Leighton in the event that some of you do not know about his life, and then about a few of his contributions. George Leighton is now 101 2/3 years old. This photograph was taken when he was 98. To put things in context, William Howard Taft was President of the United States when George Leighton was born on October 22nd, 1912. George was the son of parents who were born in the Cape Verde Islands off the northwestern coast of Africa. No English was spoken in his home. The family spoke Creole, a dialect that was based on African dialects and Portuguese. George went to a one-room schoolhouse through the 7th grade when he left school and never attended high school. As a child, George spent 7 or 8 months a year picking blueberries, cranberries, and strawberries, and on his 100th birthday, he took Tom Sullivan, my wife Nancy, and me, and pointed out to us where he picked cranberries in the patch that still exists near New Bedford, Massachusetts. George was a captain in World War II. He fought at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Green Island, and Finch Island, and was awarded a Bronze Star. But when he was 24 years old, before the war, he enrolled as a provisional student at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and then graduated Phi Beta Kappa and was awarded a scholarship to go to Harvard Law School. He graduated from Harvard Law School after the war and moved to Chicago in 1946, he says, because Big Bill Dawson was an African-American man who was a congressman from Chicago, and he wanted to come to a city where African-Americans could serve in public office. When George moved to Chicago, he could not join the Chicago Bar Association. He could not rent space in the Loop. He could not eat in most restaurants in the Loop. He could not get picked up by taxi cabs, and he was not permitted to be a member of this august club. As a lawyer, George fought race discrimination in housing, education, voting, jury selection in Illinois, and throughout the Deep South. In 1964, he was elected a judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County. In 1967, he became an appellate court justice. And in 1976, a Republican president chose George Leighton to be a federal district court judge. George had been a lifelong Democrat. Things have changed a little bit in those years. George retired from the bench in 1987 at the age of 75, and then he practiced law for 24 years with Earl Neal, Lang Neal, Jeanette Sublett, and their spectacular colleagues at what is now called Neal and Leroy. George retired at the age of 99 in 2011, and I can tell you the only reason he retired was because of mandatory CLE requirements, which he didn't. So today, Judge Leighton has the post office in New Bedford, Massachusetts, named after him. As Judge Evans noted, and Judge Evans and Judge Biebel were instrumental in this, the courthouse at 26th Street is now named after him. And George Leighton truly loves being a member of the Union League Club. So that's George Leighton. Here are but a few examples of the extraordinary contributions he's made to improving our criminal justice system. And I will skip through some of this because I know that people need to leave. But the examples in 5 categories. As Judge Evans mentioned, George Leighton as a defendant, George Leighton as a lawyer, as a judge, as an opponent of the death penalty, and finally as a beggar for justice. George as a defendant. It was 1951. George Leighton advised Mr. and Mrs. Clark that the lease they signed to move into an apartment in Cicero, Illinois, was legal and binding. They started moving their belongings into the apartment, and a race riot ensued. More than 2,000 white people burned buildings in the neighborhood of that apartment building in Cicero. A grand jury was convened. The grand jury indicted George Leighton and others for conspiracy to diminish property values and conspiracy to incite a race riot. As Judge Evans noted, and I thank him so much, and Judge Biebel for getting these materials, Thurgood Marshall came from New York to represent George Leighton. This is a copy of the appearance form, Thurgood Marshall, that Judge Evans and Judge Biebel retrieved for us. They filed a motion to quash the indictment, and the state agreed to dismiss the charges against Judge Leighton. Noli pros up in the top. Judge Biebel does that all the time, right, Judge? For our community, this was an extraordinary event. But for George Leighton, as those of you who have spoken to him know, he defines this as one of the most important moments in his life, because the lesson for him was that when he became a judge, he always thought about a case from the perspective of the judge, but also what it was like for the defendant to be standing there facing criminal charges, as George Leighton did. Another example, Robert Goldsby was indicted in Carroll County, Mississippi in 1954 for killing a white woman. The killing occurred, according to the Fifth Circuit's opinion, after the woman's husband ordered, quote, Negroes, end of quote, to leave his gas station and dairy barn. Mr. Goldsby, through an aunt in Chicago, hired George Leighton to come down to Carroll County, Mississippi to try his case. When he got there, the white lawyers in Mississippi refused to participate in a case with a so-called Negro lawyer. So George was discharged. Goldsby was convicted, sentenced to die. On appeal, George took over the appeal, convinced the Fifth Circuit that the motion that George had prepared but was never filed, claiming that there was race discrimination in the manner in which the grand juries and the petty juries were selected, was true, and the conviction was reversed. Nephew versus Illinois. Henry Nephew was convicted in Cook County in 1938 for murdering a policeman, sentenced to 199 years in prison. George Leighton was later appointed to represent him, filed a post-conviction motion claiming that the prosecutors knew that witness had perjured himself when he said that there was no leniency or promises of leniency. It went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. George prevailed, and on remand, Mr. Nephew was released from custody. Those are a few examples in the criminal justice area. George as a judge. 6 months after George Leighton became a state court judge, he presided in a bench trial over a case involving 2 men accused of attacking a police officer. He found them not guilty. The police department asked for George Leighton's resignation. The police department asked that he be sent out of the criminal courts. J. Edgar Hoover condemned the state court judge in Chicago, George Leighton. The Chicago Tribune editorialized against him, and thankfully, the judges of the Circuit Court of Cook County, the presiding judges, the executive committee, ruled in George's favor and refused to remove him from 26th Street. This isn't about whether George was right or wrong. This is about judicial independence, and to the credit of the Circuit Court of Cook County, they stood behind George Leighton, and George, this is in his first 6 months as a judge. George and the death penalty. This is from the 1964 Saturday Evening Post. Lloyd Miller was accused of killing Janice May and raping her, a young girl in downstate Illinois. This is a picture of George from the Saturday Evening Post in 1964. Key piece of evidence in Miller versus Pate, for some of those who don't know it, was prosecution evidence that they found the little girl's underwear with blood on it, and it was her blood. Case goes all the way through the state court system. George Leighton and Willard Lazarus, with an expert, discovered that this was not blood at all. This was red paint. And they prevail, and Mr. Miller is released. And last, Townsend versus Sane. George twice argued the Townsend case in the United States Supreme Court. It defined, at least before Congress passed the anti-terrorism limitations on habeas corpus, Townsend, through George Leighton's efforts, defined when an individual is entitled to an evidentiary hearing in challenging a state court conviction. Lastly, George as a beggar. I had the extraordinary experience of going to Governor Quinn with about a half a dozen Jenner and Block lawyers and George Leighton to urge the governor to sign the legislation abolishing the death penalty. The lawyers, including myself, made legal arguments to the governor as to why he should sign this legislation. And George Leighton was our final speaker. At the age of 98 in 2011, George said this to Governor Quinn in his deep and melodic voice. "Governor, I'm not here to make legal arguments. I'm here as a beggar for justice, and I implore you to sign this legislation and bring Illinois back into the civilized world." It was one of the most moving things I've ever seen, and it would have been moving if he had been 40 years old. But to see your father, Barbara, conduct himself like that with the governor, and really, it was instrumental. Several years ago, in conclusion, then Senator Barack Obama wrote a letter to George Leighton noting the words of Dr. King, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and it takes people like George Leighton to bend it." So I hope this short presentation has given you some idea of the extraordinary contributions of this amazing man and why he is a very worthy recipient of an award named after the beloved Norval Morris.
Good day to you. How are you?
Good, good, thank you. How are you? Come on in, please.
Good. I'm Professor Mahan.
Nice to meet you. My name is Sarah.
Sarah and Jesse.
University of Chicago.
Yes.
Oh, you
Yeah.
know,
Norval Morris.
Norval Morris.
Yeah, good.
So he made Adam a thinking being. And then he decided to give Adam a connection. So he gave this animal, Adam, a heart. A heart, it beat. That could tell wrong from right. That's how God then decided to give this animal, Adam, a mind and a heart. That's how justice is discerned from injustice. The interplay of the mind and the heart. And it's been like that ever since. But he gave the man forgiveness to live over again a second time. And thus, justice is found when that second time comes around. Thank you very much.
Now, if you look in your program, the last part of this award ceremony is our second award, the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award. And I call upon Mary Powers, who I just want to tell you a bit about. Mary was in with the Red Cross in the Second World War, and she has a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Wisconsin, Master degree in Sociology from the University of Wisconsin. She worked for Western Electric and Industrial Counseling, raised a family in Winnetka with 4 children. She worked with the Contract Buyers League. And then when the Panther raid came to her attention, she became a fierce advocate and a legendary advocate for criminal justice. She became involved with Citizens Alert, a police watchdog group in the 60s, and has been active with them ever since. She served as a president of our group, the Illinois Academy of Criminology, in 2003. And last year, a documentary was made about Mary and Citizens Alert called Compelled to Action by Peace Productions. The producer Jackie Rivers is here. I asked Mary Powers if she will make this next presentation. Mary?
Anne O'Brien Stevens was a woman for all seasons. She was an amazing person. I'm really honored to have been able to work with her over the years and have her as a friend as well. Anne had, for someone with no law degree or not even having gone to law school, she had all sorts of interesting career opportunities and made the most of them in criminal justice related work. For several years, her last several years, she worked for the Chicago Law Enforcement Study Group as executive director. This study group was a 501c3 not-for-profit group that did really wonderful research on every aspect of the criminal justice system. We just recently closed our Citizens Alert office, and I gave those wonderful cardboard red-covered reports to the archives at the USC. Anne lived in Uptown, and she immersed herself in all of the social problems that took place in her community. She gave vigorous advocacy to victims of domestic violence, to the homeless, the alcoholics. We served on the board of the Center for Street People Together. along with Dick and Nan Concert, who are here. Ann was a wonderful person. She just gave every iota of herself to whatever project she was working in. I know she would have been really proud to have the honor of honoring Joey Mogul with the award that was established in Ann's name. I was a recipient of that award many years ago myself, Joey, and I know Ann would really be proud to have us give you that award. Joey is an attorney with the People's Law Office, as you all know. We honor her actually for her daily dedication to justice, but primarily today for her extraordinary contribution to criminal justice in taking the issue of police torture in Chicago to the UN. We have Joey. Could you join me and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege to be here with you today, and I humbly accept this award from the Illinois Academy of Criminology. And I have to say, I'm just so honored to be here to also honor Judge Leighton. Here we are in the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer and the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And it's such a great honor to be here to honor him and all the work he did on behalf of civil rights. And it was just such a beautiful presentation, Jeff, so thank you. When Mary called me to tell me the news that I was to receive this award, I will be honest, my first reaction was that I did not want it, and I personally do not believe I'm worthy of this award. But if anyone knows, when Mary Powers asks you to do something, you cannot say no. And the fact is, I didn't want to say no because, Mary, you are such a hero of justice, and you've been a stalwart organizer in the campaign for justice in the Burge police torture cases and in combating police misconduct citywide. It's just such a true honor to be personally receiving this award from you today. It means the world to me, and I continue with others to try to walk in the trail that Mary has blazed for us. So thank you. It was thrilling to present the Chicago police torture cases to the UN Committee Against Torture in 2006, and particularly for one of the highest human rights bodies in the entire world to not only recognize the torture that occurred here in the city, but to hear our pleas for justice. Specifically, after reviewing the evidence that we presented, the UN committee not only noted the limited investigation and lack of prosecution in the Burge police torture cases, but it called on the US government to bring the perpetrators to justice. I personally believe that this finding by the UN Committee Against Torture contributed to the US Attorney's Office here, in conjunction with the US Department of Justice, to indicting John Burge for the perjury and obstruction of justice he committed when he lied about the torture he and others committed at Area 2 and 3 police headquarters. And later, this led to his conviction of all 3 counts in 2010. I do think it was a profound moment in the struggle for justice in these cases, and I think that work still continues in fighting for evidentiary hearings for the men, the Burge torture victims who still remain behind bars, and in trying to seek reparations for the Chicago police torture survivors, most of whom have gotten no financial compensation, and many who still need psychological counseling for the torture they endured. But in accepting this honor today, I don't want to stand here and pretend that I did this alone, because I did not. It was Standish Willis, a renowned criminal defense and civil rights attorney, who first had the idea of bringing the Chicago police torture cases to international fora, wanting the world to understand that there was unfortunately racist torture that occurred here on domestic soil. And it was then Flint Taylor who personally asked me to work with him 17 years ago on the Chicago police torture cases, who thankfully I've gotten to work with for the last 17 years. None of us would be here today if it wasn't for Flint, who has doggedly worked on these cases for the last 25 years, longer than any other attorney I know. And finally, I see Locke Bowman in the audience, who's been who I've also had the opportunity to partner with and work with for several years now, and who championed the cause for getting a special prosecutor back in 2001 to investigate these cases. It's also important to me to recognize Judge Beeble, who's with us today, who righteously and courageously appointed a special prosecutor to investigate the Burge torture cases in 2001, and who recently appointed a special master to determine whether there are Burge torture victims who remain behind bars, and to appoint them attorneys in order for them to have a full and fair opportunity to present their allegations of torture. I also want to recognize my partner in crime and love, and that's Andrea Ritchie, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but she was present with me in Geneva, Switzerland, and helped me present the Chicago police torture cases to the UN Committee Against Torture. And finally, I want to acknowledge all the love and support from my family and friends, who I don't think any of us could do what we do and continue to struggle on and on if it wasn't for those family and friends. My sister, Alyssa, my twin, who's here with us, who's a fierce and ferocious family attorney, much more zealous than I can ever dream to be, who is the femme to my butch and the hetero to my homo. And in case you did not know, to my uncle, yes, we are related, who I love and adore, and who is, I so appreciate his pride and his support of me. I could not be here without him. And finally, to my family at the People's Law Office and to my loves from Queer to the Left, I don't want to say anything more, but thank you so very much.
Please come. On behalf of the Illinois Academy of Criminology and Mary Powers, I am pleased to confer upon Joey Mogul the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award for Justice.
Thank you all for coming. I thank you for the shared concern we all have about justice.